I am coming to you live from Voice Radio Studio. Shout out to EP, the show host, as being my engineer. 216-772-0500. And before I get into anything at this particular time, before my guest has arrived, I just want to say that if for those who suffered through the last presidential debate, thank you, because I also suffered through it with you. And according to reports this morning, Biden still won, but it was close. A lot of close races right now in Ohio. It's supposed to be a dead heat. Some reports having Trump up in Ohio by a percentage point. I think that was the New York Post, who don't like Democrats anyway. But CNN has it as a dead heat. There was no, according to reports, there should have been some ground gained by the Trump campaign, but I think there was more ground by the Philadelphia Eagles last night to beat the New York Giants in Philly. So yeah, it's a lot going on. All I got to tell you is this: vote. Early voting is now begun. Social distancing is still in effect. We're still in a pandemic. Keywords were, the thing about it is, like, last night's takeaway was from this. It was from the word coyotes to the word to fracking to COVID-19. Everything was covered. But the thing about it is that right now we are significantly in a, this is mode crisis or whatever. I'm not going to bring up, 50 Cent endorsing Trump because of because of Joe Biden's tax plan. I brought that up for one reason. I just think that Curtis Jackson right now is in a sunken place, but that's just neither here nor there. So we do have elections. We have local judicial elections in Ohio. Last week we had Judge Wanda Jones, and right now to this week we have Special Prosecutor in place, Rick Bell. So EP, if you can play that instrumental for me, because I think that the overall, before he does that, the overall election was, how can I put it to you like this? The overall presidential debate last night was a B because there was no interruptions. So thanks to the moderator for doing the best job that she could. And, Trump was a little bit more controlled than he was the last time. But that's like saying that, that's like saying that he's the least racist president in the room. So that's about all. So farther ado, this is the intro music to Jump Around by House of Pain. Everybody's been jumping around for these past 2 weeks before November 3rd hits. Please welcome my guest, Mr. none other than Prosecutor Rick Bell. How are you doing, Rick?
Doing great, Larry. Thank you very much for having me.
No problem. I know it's notice and short notice, so I just need for you to, for the audience out there, speak up into the mic a little bit more. Announce yourself. Say it with your chest. But I know. I'm just playing. But the thing about it is that we are pretty much in the last days before the November 3rd election. So I talked to you last year. I know it was colder than it was. It's probably unusually warm for I guess everything heated up after the debate last night, huh? How has the campaign trail been?
It's been very strange. I've never seen anything like it, really. It's heated up now the last few weeks because you can finally actually reach out and talk to people if they're coming out. There have been these reverse parades, I call them, where you can give out signs and people come up and get signs and you meet them at their door when they drive up. And so that's kind of nice to be able to at least wave to people from afar and tell them who you are and get them to know you a little bit. That's always good. But for months, we haven't been able to really do anything.
Right. Yeah. The reason why is because we are still in the pandemic. And the thing about it is, before I left, looking at Spectrum News, the spike has gone up a little bit, and we have, today in Ohio we had 23 deaths from COVID-19. So how do you feel about that?
It's something that we thought was going to happen,
Mm-hmm.
and here it is. here it is upon us. And I know people like their liberties, but we have to protect each other. This isn't about me just protecting myself, my family, or you. It's about me protecting your loved ones.
Right.
You know, and I think everybody has to understand that. We have to continue to stay far apart. Nobody wants to do that. They opened up certain places and everybody started congregating, and you know, you worry about this. I don't know if anything is really going to be resolved here for another year.
Right.
We have to really start thinking about the long term here.
Right. So, you know, according, like, one of the presidential debates was COVID-19 started off the bat, and the current, I call him the current occupant at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, President Trump said, you know, we're weeks away or whatever from a vaccine. Joe Biden was, former Vice President Joe Biden said, listen to experts, said 2021, you know, or maybe close 2022. So we're going. COVID's here to stay for right now. So we just got to be careful. Correct?
Yeah, I totally agree with you. These things almost have to run its course. You can control some of it, you know, but you don't have that ability really to make an immediate effect. And I think we're all kidding ourselves if we think that that's right around the corner.
Right. So the thing about it is like we have a speaking of the subjects of the presidential debate, going off the Black Lives Matter question that was asked to both men. And since you are the special prosecutor, correct?
That's correct.
Okay.
Special Investigations Division Chief, correct.
Okay. So we're going to go into the question about what do you think about Black Lives Matter, the movement. There was a lot of, in speaking of, since you are a prosecutor, investigator, there's been a lot of stuff happen, you know, besides the pandemic. There's been a lot of civil unrest as far as the death of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, things of that nature. So to you, in being in the Department of Punishment and Law Enforcement, how do you feel about those movements and the protest that's been going on around not only the country but the world?
Yeah, you know, I think these two things go hand in hand. I see it really as an opportunity. Here we are in our homes, stuck away from each other, and everybody starting to think about their lives and what's missing and what they could be. And people get itchy, and people get angry, and they have a right to want better, and we have a right to want more for our families.
Right.
And I think the two really go hand in hand, and we have to ask ourselves, what can we do to make this world better? Again, not just for my children, but for everybody's children.
Right. So, as far as George Floyd, you know, waiting for the trial, but the main I call him murderer, Derek Chauvin, former police officer Derek Chauvin, was released out on bail, and he was allowed to leave the state of Minnesota. What do you, as a prosecutor, how do you think that these cases should have been handled differently for people of color and minorities who are pretty much, you know, they have a distrust with, I think one of the reasons why people are not voting early, there's been more than most, but they're not voting early is because they have a distrust of, you know, the justice system. What do you say to them?
Well, homicides are very important cases, and as an assistant prosecutor, anytime anybody plans to leave the state, I get very worried and very concerned because you never know what state has they might have some ability to move and go across borders.
Right.
And, that's the last thing you want, because this is all caught on video. So, you know, some people might argue that the evidence is pretty strong there. And if you've watched it like I have, 8.5 minutes, 9 minutes, it's very, very difficult to see. And I think that as a prosecutor, I would always argue that somebody shouldn't be allowed to have that type of permission if they are going to be released on bond. They shouldn't be on such a heinous case, be allowed to have that much freedom of movement.
Okay, so pretty much you are you are on the ballot yourself to what are you pretty much tell the people what are you running for?
Running for Court of Common Pleas. That's the jurisdiction where I have worked for over 29 years now, trying cases in the courtrooms and being present in front of many of the different judges. I've probably easily tried over 100 cases. I've easily practiced in front of 70 different judges. So that's where I'm familiar with, and that's where practice has been. So that's where I intend to run. That's what's happening now.
Okay, so what organizations have you been endorsed by?
Well, about every union you can think about,
Mm-hmm.
as well as Congresswoman Marcia Fudge,
Mm-hmm.
Dr. Yvonne Pointer, the Democratic Party, the Democratic nominee for this general election.
Mm-hmm.
And if you have, there are several others that you have to go through a rating process. The NAACP gave me a 4 out of 5,
Mm-hmm.
the same as my opponent, and I received ratings by the bar associations that were very high. 3 of them giving me excellence, and 2 of them giving me goods. So,
Mm-hmm.
but it's important to go through those questionnaires, those reviews, those interviews, and open yourself up and be transparent about who you are and what you intend to do.
Right. So, while the thing about it is, also you've been pushed by other organizations, clergy organizations like the Clergy Coalition, correct?
That's correct. I have met with the pastors. I've gone to all the churches for easily before COVID, of course,
Right.
and stayed in touch. And we have been to the different ministries and stayed busy during the pandemic as well at some of the churches, at the food banks, to make sure that people understood that I was trying to be there for the community as much as I could.
Right. So the thing about it is, the community is a lot of things going on in the community, and we have pretty much problems, and the main problem that we see is systemic racism. Not to say systematic, but systemic racism in not only law enforcement but in the judicial process of African Americans and other minorities. So how do you sway the inner city vote to your favor for that particular thing? What would you tell them? How will they receive justice if they come into your courtroom?
Right. I think people have to understand that every judge has to be held accountable.
Mm-hmm.
Every candidate has to be held accountable.
Mm-hmm.
And I like to work with data. I like to work with numbers. It's what I do when I do all of those rape kit cases that were left forgotten on the shelves, and try to bring justice to the women on the east side of Cleveland that have been raped by serial rapists. By keeping data, you're actually able then to go back, and you can have somebody else look at it, not just the public, but you can have researchers look to see what it is that you've done. And you can do that. You can quantify this stuff in the courts as well. So I intend from day one, and I will be doing a sentencing schedule. I will make sure that I keep a spreadsheet, a database on everybody. Anybody that comes in front of the court has so many decisions each day. Does a person get probation? How much time is their probation? Does a person get a judicial release? How often do you give it? How often does the person, or long does the person have to be incarcerated if they have to send them? And that should be the last resort. The sentencing statute is very clear that you should not sentence somebody to prison. It should be for the least amount of time that's necessary to rehabilitate the offender,
Right.
or to punish the offender to protect society. And that's actually written down. So I do follow some of the, absolutely follow the trend that I hope will happen. I believe I'll be the first one that keeps this data. I know that the Supreme Court Chief Justice has now called for this. I intend to do it and to be part of committees, and hopefully this will take care of those aberrations, the disparity. And at least, Larry, what it'll do is will bring back some trust to the courtroom, because people will be able to look through that and mine it and say, okay, did he treat this person the same as that person? And why not? What are the differences?
Right. You actually brought up a point that I was going to wait till the next segment, but I think a couple of people want to ask it now. The thing about it is like, I hate to ask you this, but I'm going to call this the headache question. So, ready?
Sure.
All right. The thing about it is like, there's been, during the campaign, there's been one particular case. I guess it was a rape case. I forgot the name. Chris Green. I think it's the right one, that came up on your docket. You prosecuted. Judge Donald ruled on it. A lot of people have been protesting that it was wrongful. So could you explain your side of the situation, how this came to you before we go on a break? Just give that information because there's a lot of voters that were interested about hearing, I don't know, like we believe in hearing both sides of the story. So give us your take.
I don't read. I think you're talking about the Christopher Miller.
Christopher Miller, that's what I meant. Christopher Miller, yes.
Right. Which was not my case in particular. I was not the assistant prosecutor that directly handled Christopher Miller, but I was in the office at the time. So sometimes people like to, say that everybody is responsible, or perhaps I am. But that's one of those cases that there was a woman who was raped in Cleveland Heights on her way into her apartment. There were 3 assailants. She testified to. They burglarized her home. They put a towel over her face and they sexually assaulted her in terrible ways. And that was something that she actually picked Christopher Miller out of a lineup. And to this day has said that that's the person that
Steps as a person still. Go ahead.
Well, there's DNA back then at the time, and I like to make sure that we continue to use DNA because it does evolve. And in that case, again, which wasn't my personal case, there was testing back then, and one of the assailants was able to be prosecuted. There's a smidgen of DNA at the time that showed that there was another person that also raped her. And when it was tested many, many years later with newer techniques, and they dived into it more, they found that it was the third person that was involved, the person that had provided a statement against Christopher Miller. So the office went through an innocence review through the wrongful conviction of the integrity unit, and the office decided that Christopher Miller should be released based upon that evidence, even if the victim still believed that he was the rapist.
Okay.
And I think that was the right thing to do.
Right. So pretty much you weren't the lead person on the case. You were the person that was you just pretty much handling everything, assisting, correct?
Well, when you're working as the supervisor, or you watch over cases, the case when it comes in, and then the case back then, evidence changes.
Right.
Sometimes that's why DNA is so good. DNA can be used to exonerate people. DNA can be used to show that it's somebody else that's responsible. And I believe that that's the right thing to do. Always to try to use the best techniques that you can and to resolve the cases because evidence may change, and that's what happened in that case.
Right. So the thing about it is, the reason I asked that is because there's been a lot of protests, a lot of how people are rallies, as far as your candidacy for judge and Judge John O'Donnell's candidacy, because he was the person who pretty much ruled on the case, and then it was let go. So how do you feel?
And I don't know. I don't even know if Judge O'Donnell was the judge on that case. I don't think that was the case.
Okay. So, and it probably, or it was something. No, I think it was the 137 shots with Judge O'Donnell. Excuse me. But how do you feel with the Christopher Miller thing? How do you feel that hurt you in your running? Because you did get the Democratic nomination. You did get all the other people backing you. How do you feel that? Did you feel like it hurt you in some way in the campaign after you got out there, after all this mess was pretty much died down a little bit, the pandemic?
Well, when you're running and you have an opponent, and there are people that support either side or both sides, people bring stuff up and they try to make something of something to say that, oh, you must also be responsible. You were the assistant prosecutor.
Right.
Also, that was in that office, and there's 220 of us in the office.
Right.
And, is there a spillover effect? It's hard to try to make sure that everybody understands the real facts there of the case when if somebody does try to inflame passions there. But that's the way that it happened.
Right, because and said, and this woman still says that Christopher Miller was the one that was a part of the assault on her, correct?
That's the last that I had heard about the case.
Okay.
Probably 3 years ago, when it wasn't mine to review, but it was something that I understood that to be the final analysis. The investigators went out and spoke to her again. And I believe that's the case. Although, again, I wasn't overseeing that, so I don't know in particular, but that's exactly what I've heard.
Okay, so I just want to get the facts straight and make sure that you had a chance to come on here and tell that particular part, because voters look at that, especially now since, like I said, Black Lives Matter, George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, things of that nature, and with the Breonna Taylor decision from the Attorney General, and now that's being investigated. So, what do you think about? Before we go to break, one last question: what do you think about people who were elected that break the law to serve their own interests or don't follow through with the letter of it?
Well, you don't want to betray the trust of the people, and that's something that's very important. So if anybody's elected or appointed or is a public servant, you have to follow the law. And if somebody like a police officer has done that, they have to be held accountable, just like you or I would have to be held accountable.
Right.
So that's the rule. And if you don't, then
You don't. You go to jail.
you forfeit your ability to serve the public anymore. You should be in prison.
Okay. So we're gonna go to break. We're gonna take a short break. When we come back, we're gonna talk more about pretty much law enforcement and how it plays, and pretty much opinions from you about how this current occupant is going to do it. So this is Larry H. Gardner, Headlines, Headaches, VoiceItRadio.com. Just playing a little instrumental, soothing your evening from 5 to 6. We'll be right back. I hated to ask you that question. I had to, because I'm just being honest. I had to.